Hello, and welcome to the Sound on Sound People and Music Industry podcast with me, Sam Inglis. I'm very pleased today to be joined by Tim Carroll and Will Hoult from Focusrite.
Thank you.
Hey, very nice to see you again, Sam.
It's now 10 years since Focusrite launched their milestone Scarlett series of USB audio interfaces, and we'll be looking at how the success of those interfaces has happened and how it's changed the company in a minute. First of all, though, I thought I would like to ask Tim, you're the CEO of Focusrite, but prior to going into the business side of the music industry, you were yourself a professional musician for many years. How has that experience informed your management and the way you run Focusrite?
Yeah, thanks, Sam. That's a great question. So I guess, when I came into it, I'm going to show my age a little bit here. MIDI was a thing. Digital audio recording was just really starting to become a promise, if you will. And I was a keyboard player. And as you can imagine, so MIDI was something that I was getting my head around that became more and more sort of involved in every kind of recording project I did. When computers sort of really came into the studio, I think a lot of times, not just for me, for a lot of keyboard players, we were the guys that were sort of regulated to figure it out or considered, well, you have to be the expert on this because you know how to run all the MIDI stuff. And, back then, I guess what was interesting is that, it was really early days and a lot of this stuff didn't work as promised. I mean, there was a dream there, if you will, about what it all could do, but I think it was, many years away. And so for me, I got to experience firsthand how, people have this expectation that technology is supposed to do something, and maybe it's not quite there yet. And so that was interesting. And for me, what I was able to do, because it's a very small industry, I was able to actually, ring these people up, and the first kind of real digital audio recording experience I had was with Digidesign with Sound Tools, and then a company called Opcode with Studio Vision. And I used to call them up and say, hey, I'm in a session, and a lot of times it was like, yeah, we're trying to sort that out ourselves. And so I actually made a great connection with those guys, which served me well going forward. But for me, I can still appreciate, for the professional community that we solve, just how important it is when they invest in your gear. They're not just spending their money on, the hard-earned money. They're investing their time to integrate that into their workflow, and they're also kind of counting on you to come through for them because there's an expectation that, your piece of technology is going to do something new and extra. And I take that very personally because I've been in that seat before on there. And then, I guess on the other side of it is, I got to, work with a lot of friends and people who, were not professionals, but they wanted to record at home. And I got to see firsthand, what that whole experience was for people in terms of just, suddenly it was like the idea, the concept of, using their laptop or computer to record was a fabulous idea. But when they suddenly realized that there was this whole world of, language, nomenclature, and things they need to learn around it, it becomes a very big uphill battle for them. And that's something that I would always get the call to try to help them out. So in the back of my mind going over time, both sides of that, the sort of the new user, the hobbyist, and also the professional, I think my experience, dealing with the technology in the way I did, has really helped me continue to understand where the customer's coming from. And the cool thing, if I could just add, is that, one of the great things about our employee base here at Focusrite is that we have a lot of people that leave work every day and they go out and they gig. They're DJs, they're guitar players, they're musicians, they're podcasters. And they come back in the next day, and they kind of pick back up, but they've used the kit overnight. In a very real world way, either, at home for fun or, actually for a paying gig. And that feedback they bring, first off, it rings a lot of memory bells for me when they come back and they say, hey, something didn't work right, or I figured this out and stuff. So we take a lot of that to heart.
Well, it's been quite a long time now since you made that transition from being a musician yourself into working in the business side of the industry. The market has changed an awful lot in those ways. What do you see as the most significant changes that have happened in that time?
Well, I guess the first thing is, the amount of content and the ability for people to create content has dramatically changed. It's really interesting. I mean, I've always been, as a keyboard player, I've always been a real synth guy, but I think it didn't really dawn on to me until, probably about 10 years ago about just how much electronic music has completely democratized music creation. I'd have some people go, God, look at all these artists that are out there, that are, filling up concert halls and stuff, and they're not really players. How do you feel about that? And it was just like, well, okay, he's got 5 other musicians on stage. I feel good about that because, that's just bringing the whole industry up. But, so I think, the genres of music have really just and allowed so many more people to have a great experience, whether they just want to do it for fun or it becomes something serious for them. That's the first thing. I think also as we move along in time, the other thing that I'm aware of is that, we have a whole new crop of people that are getting into this technology. And these are people that, grew up with iPads in their cribs. So they have a very different kind of expectation about how technology works all together. The concept that, you're sort of strapped to a desk with a laptop and an audio interface, and that's how you create music. And that's the only place you can do it. They don't really understand that because this is a group of people that, have come up and there's like, well, hold on, I can do anything on my laptop, which I want to do, but I want to be able to, pick up and carry on with what I'm doing on my phone, on the tube, or on my iPad at my friend's house and stuff. So there's this very collaborative workflow thing that's happening as well. So, I think in general, it's the democratization of music creation. It's new types of content like podcasting that, again, has really opened the net for people, to express themselves in different ways. And then also just the expectation of how all this technology is going to work together. Those are sort of the big ones that I've seen. I mean, fundamentally, at the core, the root cause for people getting this hasn't changed. They have a desire to express themselves in some way.
And Focusrite, of course, have been partners with people on that journey for a long time now. And the launch of the Scarlett Range 10 years ago was a bit of a milestone, really, because that's gone on to become astonishingly successful. I saw a statistic which said that one of the Scarlett models is now the best-selling audio interface of all time. Do you think the people who buy Scarletts today have the same priorities as those who bought the original model 10 years ago?
I think fundamentally, yes. And even if they don't really quite understand what the technology is all about, I mean, it's really interesting. We collect a lot of data when people, buy one of our products. We've spent an inordinate amount of time on their onboarding journey to really kind of streamline for the use case and stuff. But at the start of that, we asked some really basic questions of these folks, and I think what's become clear is that a lot of people, regardless if they're brand new, they appreciate the legacy of our brand and where we originated from, from that really big, large Focusrite console, and how a lot of that technology and that signal path and that story has come down even to things like Scarlett is really interesting, and then I think the other thing again is that we spend a lot of time on this onboarding journey, to really understand who you are and what you're trying to do. And it was really fascinating because, when we really first started this, you have all these different assumptions that somebody's buying an interface and they're going to use every single connector and thing on it. And what we found out is that there's a lot of people that, were buying our interface for, producing beats and stuff, and we were taking them through a whole bunch of tutorials about how to adjust a microphone level or something like that was completely irrelevant to them at that point in time, maybe not later on, but at the beginning. And so by streamlining that, what's happened is that when we go and we look at all the reviews and the feedback we get from people, the one thing that we see so much appreciation for, especially for the new users and the hobbyists, is like, I bought this, I had this idea in my head, I was going to be able to do this. I've heard from my friends and elsewhere that this is not easy to do, and you guys really kind of put my mind at ease on that. I was up and running in a short amount of time and not incredibly overwhelmed on what I want to do. And that to me is the recipe for success on this type of thing at the Scarlett end, is that, people are buying this because they have an idea in the head of what they want to accomplish and what they want to do. And, we take it on very seriously that, the onus is on us is actually to make them feel really great about that. And the kind of, yes, I'm validation, I can do that. Or, if the technology is just so overwhelming and stuff, it can squash their dreams, which, they're likely to put it in a closet and never use it again.
So the key to the success of the Scarletts for you is enabling that journey and removing obstacles from people's paths.
Absolutely. Yeah. And we talk about that a lot. It's sort of in our company's mantra about removing barriers to creativity. And that's something that not only just for the beginner, but for the pro as well. I mean, we look at those as very different things. For the beginner, it's really about removing all the technical jargon, let them get them running really quickly, because if they have that great first experience, it's just human nature. You'll want to learn more, and then you'll actually be sort of prepped, to get more into the technology. Maybe then you'll want to pick up a manual and read because you want to do more. But it's enabling that. And then on the professional side, again, it's really about when somebody buys something like one of our RedNet products or Red products or ISA products, that's an investment of their time, their money, and their skill. And our big job there, to be just brutally honest, is we need to give them everything they need to integrate that into their workflow and then get the hell out of their way, because they already know what they're doing, and, we just need to make sure that, the reason they bought it, they feel good about it, and it enhances what they do.
Absolutely. So there's been a couple of pretty major curveballs being thrown at the industry over the last couple of years, one of which was the pandemic, which has led to a big boom in home recording and sales of home recording products. But I imagine that's also posed a few business challenges for you.
Yeah, it certainly has. The pandemic was really interesting. And, a lot of people ask, we just finished our annual results, and a lot of our investors ask, okay, well, look, you're still doing well, 2 years into this thing, but, is it a bubble? And I think the way we answer that is that, before the whole pandemic actually began, that Christmas season in the January and February before, COVID was really a thing, we already were seeing a pretty material increase in the number of people, buying our products, identifying, primarily as music creators, but also podcasters and people doing streaming and things like this. And so when the lockdown happened and suddenly there was just this huge influx of people wanting, this technology for different reasons, there was a decision to be made. For us, it was, okay, do we think this is just a short-term thing? A bunch of people are going to buy these products and then it's going to go back to where it was. Or is this just kind of a catalyst for an acceleration we were already on? And we kind of bet on the second one. And it was a big bet, to be honest with you, because it meant going, okay, we were already on this curve. Let's go ahead and do all the things that, we should as a business. That's like, increasing our component, purchase orders, ramping up production, all these different things. And, I'm really proud to say that, our bet paid off on that. Because our hypothesis was right. Whereas we did see that enormous first big, spike, where that has settled down to and remained, throughout this day, is materially higher than where we were pre-COVID. And we look at all this registration data and, that we get from people. And it's really interesting because even as countries have come in and out of lockdown, we watch that very closely, and we can tell daily who's registering a new product and what their use case is. And we can't really see as, like if country A suddenly goes on a green list and now they can travel or go on holiday again, we haven't seen any negative, a decline on that, if you will. So our working hypothesis is, look, we were this type of technology and, was already on a natural curve up. And what the COVID pandemic has done is just accelerated, probably where we would have been naturally maybe in 2 or 3 years' time. It's just made it occur quicker. But as you say, there's a ton of challenges. First off was just keeping up with all the demand, that increased demand. When you build products, all of our stuff is, created here, but the majority of our products are built overseas in Malaysia and China. And when you decide that you suddenly want, a significant amount more, you don't really see the result of that for 6 to 8 months. So, the fact that we were able to work with our component manufacturers and our, contract manufacturers to make that happen quicker than that, and keep a steady supply of products was, that was quite a Herculean feat that we were able to pull off.
Yeah, for sure. And that, of course, combines with the other major issue that's affected manufacturers over the last couple of years, which is what people are calling the chip shortage, not helped by the fire at the AKM factory, which made most of the A to D and D to A converters used in professional audio products. So that must have been quite a headache for you.
Yeah, it was funny. We were just when that happened, it was just like all we could kind of do was just chuckle and go, okay, what's next? It's just like, there was a funny thing somebody sent me. It was just like, right after that happened, and I think what they said was, it feels like every week in this year ought to end with a Willy Wonka Oompa Loompa song about, some lesson you learned, and it was just like it. But yeah, I mean, the AKM factory was just like, oh God, the component thing was already starting to get bad. It was just like, okay, how could you make a bad situation horrible? And that was certainly the way to do it. And we were certainly affected. I guess, glass is half full. The products that were mostly impacted on the AKM side for us were mostly on our Claret range. So that's, a product range that, we did have to do an entire rework on. And we just turned the corner like last month on, relaunching the new range, the Claret Plus range. And, again, I'm really proud of the team because it was like, the obvious thing to do would have just been to do the rework to get a new chip in there and to have the same unit. But the team actually had a nice backlog of features they wanted to add to Claret for the next generation that wasn't scheduled for really another couple of years. They were to pull that in. And so the new ones, they are a new generation, the specs and everything. Same thing. We had, a couple problems across Atom and with sequential on chips. But, when I look holistically at the AKM thing, I think we came out better than others. So for example, Scarlett didn't use any of the AKM parts. So for us, it was more about just dealing with, the other chip manufacturers who were all vying for silicon. But, in that world, the interesting thing is, I kind of describe it, whereas we use a lot of kind of mainstream components, if you will, those companies are set up in verticals. So they're, for two of the biggest ones, there's an audio division, and we happen to be a big fish in that pond, if you will. Of course, they're also supplying components to Cisco and Apple and everybody. So when you get into the ocean, we're a little minnow, if you will. But we were able to hold our own. And again, I think part of it is that we saw this early days, and the fact that we had increased all of our production quantities and stuff. When that started to get really bad, we weren't getting what we wanted, but we were getting a much higher percentage than if we had just sat still.
It's always good when a gamble pays off like that.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, another thing I wanted to ask you was, and this probably relates to the issue of getting people on board and removing obstacles from creativity. In the last few years, we've seen some other major companies in the same line of business launch their own recording software to partner their audio interface. I think of PreSonus with Studio One, for example, or Universal Audio with Luna. This isn't something that Focusrite have done yet, to my knowledge. Your interface is still shipped with OEM versions of other software. Is this something you've looked into?
Yeah, so I guess first off, I it's a small industry. I have a lot of friends across those different companies, and I've tried those apps, and they're all great. But to be honest with you, I think the audio community needs another digital audio workstation like it needs a hole in the head. It's just I can't really conceive. When I look at first the maturity of the products out there. You look at Pro Tools, you look at Ableton, you look at Logic, and all of these are 20+ year, apps, that, they do anything to a piece of audio you'd want to, and so for us, we really feel that part of the market is served. I just can't really understand what benefit it would be, to our customers to come up with another alternative on there. However, what there we do have a growing software division, and we don't really boast about this a lot, but our iOS apps, which are all about electronic music creation under the Amplify brand, have been some of the best-selling apps on the Apple Store for a long time. And we still have millions of people that download those apps every year, and it's a great experience because they're free and they can use it. But we've taken what we've learned from that experience and what we hear from our customers, and where you're going to see us pointing our sights is really towards that beginner and hobbyist, because honestly, and it's not a competitive thing against Pro Tools and Ableton. We love those guys, and we'll continue to bundle because we want people ultimately, if people are fine going through the learning curve on them with them, and in those light versions, I mean, they're great, but at face value, what they are is the same complex UI and workflow with less features on there. So we're giving newcomers a better shot at understanding, but it's still, from what we hear from many, it's just a bridge too far. So our idea is, what we really take ownership on is, we have so many people that are coming in that are beginners at this, or they're hobbyists, and they want to have fun, and they may have a couple hours at best to devote to this, and we want them to have a great experience with this. So we're taking everything we've learned from Amplify in the electronic music world, and we want to try to bridge that gap. And and we think fundamentally two things will happen. There'll be a lot of people at the that are just having fun with this, that we'll give them enough tools. Well, they'll be able to do everything they kind of want to do, and they'll have a great time, and they'll stay in our own little ecosystem, and at some point, what we hope they'll do is that they'll want to learn more, or they'll hit a ceiling with what we can do, because what we're going to do is never going to have the feature set that Pro Tools or Ableton or any of these are going to have. But we hope that they'll have had enough of an enjoyment and a great experience that they'll be willing to take that step and learn that UI and all the the language and everything that comes with it. And that's fine for us too, because if we can actually cultivate a whole bunch of new customers to want to go on that journey and become more passionate users and maybe even aspiring professionals, first off, commercially, we have a whole portfolio of things we can sell to them there. But for the community in general, that's a win, And we've had a lot of talks with all these DAW manufacturers about that, and they all completely understand there's a big gap there, But when you look at that community and where I came from, running Avid's music division for so long, I know what kind of demands are on, like, the Pro Tools guys there, for features and keeping up with OS upgrades. I mean, professionals depend on that. There's no way that those guys could take bandwidth and development time out of that to go and try to make a simpler application. It's just not really feasible. If they could, they would have done it by now.
So in your view, the beginners and hobbyists are better catered for by creating solutions especially for them than by sort of diluting the professional products to make them simpler?
Yeah, and it's exact. I mean, it's fine. I mean, again, there'll be a number of people that are willing to, they're excited and they're willing to jump into Pro Tools and Ableton and learn that. But we know that there's a lot of people that buy this and they get frustrated really quickly. And one of the main complaints is, I didn't realize it was this hard. And a lot of them will tell us, I installed everything, I had it working. It took me a week to make my first soundtrack, and I still don't really quite understand what I'm doing. We really want to fix that.
Well, that's a very noble aim. Another topic I wanted to ask you about was on a business level, diversification, because in the last few years we've seen Focusrite both make some significant acquisitions like Adam Audio and Martin Audio, and also spin out Focusrite Professional as a separate division within the company. Is this part of a long-term strategy for the company?
Well, I think it is. I came on to Focusrite in January of 2017, and until that time, the company had only really done one acquisition, and it was buying Novation out of insolvency. When I looked around, one of the first things I thought was, okay, well, there's so much of the entire sort of production chain that we don't really participate in, and so many people are opting for a Focusrite audio interface, which is sort of the heart of the system. Why shouldn't we? And I think from there it was a journey of saying, okay, well, we look competitively, and we've seen, okay, there's a lot of companies that have, taken their brand and they've expanded their portfolio organically. So they've added studio monitors or this or that or whatever. But when we looked at that, we were like, okay, well, we could certainly do that. We absolutely have the contract manufacturing chops that if we wanted to, we could actually go and build a pair of Focusrite monitors or, something like that. But what became really evident is the people that were winning in that business, the people that were well known, had been on a journey very similar to Focusrite. 10, 15 plus years of focusing on this one thing and doing it really well. And we thought, that's probably the better path for us, is see if we can go out and find like-minded people like us that, have, built a reputation over a number of years and have really passionate, smart folks that know how to do one thing really well. I happen to know a couple of the guys that were with Atom Audio at the time, and so that was the conversation. And very quickly we came to realize that this company is basically like Focusrite was 5 years ago, and it seemed like a great fit. And so that was the first one we did, and that was a great acquisition. They've done really well. Both financially and just in terms of just holistically for the company on there. And then, I think Martin Audio was another one, where our pro products had always always been involved in things like tour sound and broadcast things. But, when we looked at like, okay, from a more of a company corporate, type of view, it's like, okay, how do we maybe, have more eggs in more baskets? So we're not just solely focused on the creation side of the music. And really up until the pandemic, live events, installed sound was a very steady, healthy growing business. And Martin Audio happens to be about 3 blocks down the road from us. And, so we've known these guys for a long time. Matter of fact, we have some employees that, their significant others work there. So when we found out that they were, up for sale, it just seemed to make sense. And that's been a great acquisition. And I got to say, even though we bought them in 19 and 2 months later, live events just stopped. Those guys have still had an exceptional year in their installed sound products. And, the tour sound business, the live events will come back, and they've got a really healthy pipeline. So, those are the type of things I think that we're looking for. We think there's a number of other businesses about that size, very passionate people, with really strong brands that we'd love to have become part of the family.
Wow. Well, thank you very much, Tim. This has been absolutely fascinating. I've got one final question that I'd like to ask you. One issue that I don't see talked about very much in the audio industry, but is at the forefront of a lot of people's minds after COP26, and that's sustainability. Now, you've recently started to take this pretty seriously.
Absolutely. So I would point people, if they really want to get a flavor for what we're doing, again, we just published our annual results. If you go up to the Focusrite PLC website and download our annual report, you'll see a number of sections that are dedicated to this. We're being quite upfront about, our position right now is we are taking this very seriously. As you said, we've put a full-time person in charge of this who knows our business well. He's already done some amazing things. He's been able to go and look holistically at our UK offices, do some changes, and we've reduced our carbon footprint in the offices by 80% already. But on the products, I think one of the things, we're hearing this from customers, our employees are really passionate about this as well. So we've already begun in its early days dissecting every one of our products just to understand, what is the makeup of that? Where is the big win that we can have on the footprint piece? Also thinking of things like transportation and air freight. We've actually started to pay back, some of the on some of the air freight that we've done on this. So, our position is like, look, we don't have it all figured out yet, but this is really important to us, and we're working, with our contract manufacturers, and we're looking at next generation of products to really. Our goal is by next year to really have a great baseline. We'll already have accomplished some really cool things, but to really say, this is where we think we are. This is where we'd like to be in the next 3 years and the next 5 years. And, we're pretty much putting a stake in the ground and saying for our industry, we'd love to be the people that look at it and go, they're doing it right.
Well, thank you so much, Tim. This has been an absolutely fascinating conversation. And I hope that in 10 years' time, we'll be able to have this conversation again, and we'll be looking at another 10 years of success for Focusrite and for the Scarlett range. And that we'll be able to look back and say that you did make those changes and that the industry did follow suit and is now a much more sustainable and greener world. So thank you very much, Tim Carroll.
Okay, thank you, Sam. Take care.
So, Will, if I could turn to you, before we talk a little bit about the Scarlett range and your involvement in that, perhaps you could tell us a little bit about yourself and your role at Focusrite.
Absolutely. So, I'm head of product for both Focusrite and the Novation brand within the Focusrite group of companies. Essentially, my responsibility is to look after the product strategy and identify where we can add to our product portfolio, where we can make updates. And ultimately, I love to describe my role as balancing the needs of the customer and the needs of the company, and making sure that we ultimately can produce products that satisfy both sides of that equation. It's really good fun. I've been at Focusrite for over 11 years now, most of that time working within product management. So it's been a really fun experience, and I'm really excited about the future.
So to judge by the success of Focusrite products in that time, and especially the Scarlett range, you're obviously doing something right in terms of that balance. And I imagine one of the hardest parts of getting that balance right is helping people overcome the intimidation factor that exists when you're trying to get started in digital recording.
Absolutely, yeah. So our mission at Focusrite is ultimately to remove barriers to creativity. It really flows through everything that we do from start to finish. So that's not just in product development, but that actually flows through every aspect of the company, whether it's within the sales team, the marketing team, customer support as well, being obviously a key area that we focus on there. So that removing barriers to creativity really sets the scene for every piece of work that happens. Some specific examples of what we've delivered that is really visible in terms of fulfilling that mission. We have a wonderful interactive onboarding system that essentially takes a new Scarlett user through the initial journey of setting up their device. So essentially you plug your Scarlett in, and the first thing you'll see is a pop-up which allows you to go off onto this journey through our website. And through that process, essentially, it will help identify exactly what it is the user is trying to achieve, and then guide them through the process of getting it set up. And kind of the final step of that is, have you achieved your goal? Hopefully customers are clicking that yes button, and they've ultimately got to the point that they were looking to. So that's one of the key aspects of it. Along that path, we deliver quite a lot of video content that ultimately takes people through that journey, and just make sure that some of those complexities, many of which are not necessarily directly in our hands, like some of the operating system configuration, some of the DAW configuration, and making sure that that's really obvious up front. And just hopefully getting people to the point where once they've finished that short journey, they're actually able to start recording music, playing back music, creating music, whatever it is that their aim was when they started that process.
One of the other big barriers that can cause problems for people trying to record on computers is driver quality and driver performance. And from what I gather, Focusrite have been on quite a journey with regard to the USB drivers that you use with the Scarlett system. Yeah,
it's been a really excellent experience for us over, what has it been, the last 10 years or so since we launched the first in the Scarlett range, and then prior to that, even with the Sapphire range of interfaces, and probably most notably within that Sapphire 6 USB, and how that's flowed through into our USB interfaces today. Ultimately, developing drivers is quite challenging. There are some really key requirements for users, but one of those sort of really difficult things up front is just what constitutes a great driver. There are multiple aspects to it that, depending on exactly who it is that we're talking to as a user, they'll have slightly differing requirements. So, two key aspects that we probably would consider, maybe three. So those two or three would be, for example, latency. That's always going to be a really important one. I'll probably touch on that more in just a second. Stability as well. There's no use in having the fastest driver on the planet, the fastest performance on the planet, if it's going to drop out constantly, and actually you're not going to get a good quality of recording at the end of it. And then the final aspect is just back to point that we were talking about before around making it as simple an experience as possible. We want the performance, we want the interaction with the device to just be as straightforward as it can be. All of those factors and lots more technical much more technical aspects to that, really feed in and shape what that driver will look like. So I guess on the latency side of things, there's quite a number of different things that feed into what actually constitutes the latency of any given audio interface. Possibly one of the biggest is actually on the hardware itself. So when we go through an ADC or when we come back out through a DAC, those two components will actually add latency in and of themselves. So even with considering how to optimize the driver, that is one of the other sources of latency that we have to consider, as well as then any processing that happens on the interface itself. So whether it's the onboard mixer or the actual process of taking it from kind of a raw digital audio to something that will be communicated across the USB cable into the computer ultimately. And then we've got the driver once it gets there. And again, that's forgetting the DAW and any processing that people want to add along the way. So multiple different aspects to it. And the driver is one of the key ones that we've been really focused on for probably the last decade now in terms of going on this journey of improvement. So I think, rightfully so, there was historic criticism of the latency on some of our interfaces, and that really really put the fire under our belly to make sure that we were working on improving that. So over the years, we have gradually been improving not just the latency of the driver for new product releases, but also focusing on continuing to update the driver for the products that already exist out in the market. So good example of that would be the first generation of Scarlett interfaces. Mentioned before, like the 2i2, I'm pretty sure was a 2011 release when we came out with that, late 2011. We've been continuing to update those drivers along the way and have been improving the latency and the stability all along that path.
That's fantastic. So not only can you still use your 10-year-old Scarlett interface with a modern computer, but you actually get better performance now than you would have done 10 years ago.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And, it's a key part of what we're doing is both improving the performance and also doing our best to improve the longevity of support for interfaces. Ultimately, we recognize that customers are investing in our hardware and that they expect that to continue returning for them into the future. So, it's a key part of what we're doing is, as I say, not only improving the future products that we come out with, but also the current ones. I guess, as I say, a good example of that is just how that latency has improved over time. But it's also, it's also important for us to note just that point around how different users have different requirements and different expectations. So one of the key things that we are is class compliant to the USB audio interface standard, such that you could take your Scarlett, plug it in, and get running straight away without having to go away and install additional drivers. So on the Mac side, that makes things really nice and simple. We can utilize the core audio driver platform, which is fundamentally excellent. We can then further enhance that with there's an additional installer you can grab from the website, which will help to improve the latency even further. And that's by basically kind of giving more detailed information to the operating system about the interface. And then on the Windows side, there's a huge amount of development that goes into our ASIO drivers to make sure that, again, they're operating with the best combination of latency and stability. But all of that is also working alongside just purely the way that USB works itself. So if we look at USB from kind of a relatively low level, and probably we could go much deeper than I can on this conversation, but there are certain aspects of USB that actually make it really difficult to be a low latency and stable environment for audio. So it's quite challenging for manufacturers. That's like direct memory access. So not having that. We've also got USB port drivers, which vary across lots of different manufacturers and platforms. And then we've also got other USB traffic that's trying to compete for the same time slots on the same bus. So all of these different factors, which vary from computer to computer, what we have to consider when we're developing. So it's a really it's a really challenging part of development, but it's also one that we really relish in terms of being able to find those extra efficiencies and those extra bits of stability to deliver to our user base.
Well, it's interesting to me then that USB seems to have remained the dominant protocol for connecting audio interfaces, at least in the project studio market and the mid-market. And in fact, Focusrite have now, I understand, discontinued the Thunderbolt version of the Claret series. So do you see USB as being here to stay? There's not likely to be replaced by Thunderbolt at that level?
Yeah, so just on that Claret point, we've been delivering the Claret USB range for, I think, 2.5-3 years at this point, and we've recently updated it to the Claret Plus range. Those are based on USB. And you're right, previously to that, the Claret range was a Thunderbolt interface range. Do I see USB being fundamentally replaced at the lower price points? No, I think there's a number of challenges that we face in terms of being able to do that as an industry. So probably the biggest of those ends up being cost. So just there's a kind of a cost premium associated with manufacturers adding Thunderbolt into the interfaces. So that goes in a number of different areas. Probably the biggest two that come to mind immediately are in the silicon that is needed to actually support those platforms. So it's quite a cost up in terms of the chips that we need to support Thunderbolt. But then also Thunderbolt brings with it, compared to USB, enhanced power requirements and power offerings. So all of that means that we then have to increase the size of the power supply that would go into a unit. So the couple of different areas combined fundamentally mean that the price just goes up as a starting point. There's also on the other side, which is kind of the key reason why we moved to USB with the Claret range back in 2018, is that Thunderbolt is very well supported and implemented on the Mac OS side of things. And actually, it's really straightforward for us on Mac to be able to develop Thunderbolt interfaces and ultimately to have what we find to be a very stable and low latency environment, as we were talking about previously. On the Windows side, there are so many more variations on the hardware platform, and then in terms of the firmware that lives on the motherboards on the PC market. So historically, it's been much more challenging for us to be able to provide the level of both performance, but also critically stability that customers require in that area. However, things have come a long way over the last probably 2 years in that regard. And Thunderbolt 3 in particular is now pretty well supported and implemented in the PC market. There's still a price premium in terms of the computers, but the great news is, and again, this talks to trying to ensure longevity of support for interfaces, we've now added Windows support for our Thunderbolt interfaces. So that's both the Claret range as well as the Red range. And that's not just on existing, on current and future products. That is very much on the existing products that are out in the world already.
Oh, fantastic. Another aspect of interface design that's really crucial and helps to set some models apart from others is microphone preamps. You've got some users who are recording drums. They need to be able to accommodate very loud signals. You've also got people recording podcasts on something like an SM7 or an RE20. They need to be able to get a healthy signal level from quiet speech into their DAWs. Is it challenging to come up with a preamp design that kind of is both affordable and yet capable in all those scenarios?
Fundamentally, yes, that is a challenge. And I think you've really kind of hit the nail on the head in terms of one of the first things we have to recognize with, I guess, the design of any product, but also specifically here, mic pre's. And that is the massive variance in terms of use case and requirements that fundamentally users have. So you mentioned using lower sensitivity microphones and then also having different sound pressure levels from the source ultimately. So to pick two extremes that we do encounter, we've got low sensitivity microphones like, or lower sensitivity microphones like the SM7B, which is actually relatively similar when you think about it to an SM58 in terms of sensitivity. One of the key differences, though, in terms of how people use that is there's quite a bigger distance between the front of the grill and the capsule on the SM7B when compared to the 58. So we have to look beyond just the specification of a microphone and beyond the SPL, but then also start to look at the physical design of a microphone and the way that it ends up being used. So all of that kind of feeds into one end of the scale. And then at the other end, we get contacted by customers who need to be able to input or fundamentally use measurement microphones as their overheads on a drum kit that's pushing 130 plus dB SPL. So we've got this massive variance where you've got something very low level, something very high level, and that's really the crux of the challenge for us. So yes, more gain ultimately helps to make that situation easier, but with higher gain circuitry comes higher noise. As we start to push components to their extremes, then their characteristics start to change as well. So start to get a greater level of distortion once you get towards the limits. You'll start to get differences in the frequency response. So really it is a challenge trying to balance all of these. We could start to look at putting things like pads in front of the mic pre. That now presents another set of issues. So that's an increased cost that goes on to there. To design a pad that remains constant in terms of impedance becomes again more expensive. If we don't do that, then you start changing the loading on the microphones and the sound changes. Fundamentally, it's more circuitry that's going in and at higher cost, and ultimately is going to promote more noise into the end recording. So it's a really big challenge, and really the art for us is understanding what it is that users are trying to achieve, and that's the complete chain of that, and then trying to balance all of those needs with ultimately the price that we're trying to hit with one of those products.
Another thing I wanted to ask you about was the form factor of audio interfaces. And the Scarlett range provides some good examples here because, for instance, at the top of that range, you've got the Scarlett 18i20, which has got 8 mic preamps, ADAT expansion, a couple of headphone ports, and in fact is very similar in terms of what I/O it offers to a number of other products on the market. But at the same time, if you wanted, say, 10 or 12 mic preamps or a slight variation on that theme, you'd find it pretty hard to track that down. Why do you think there is this sort of conformity in terms of the form factor in the market?
I think that's a really interesting question. And I think, I suspect the answer to it ultimately lies in history and not necessarily in something something obvious to point out. So I think that historically, multiples of 8 have been quite handy from a technology perspective. So you can look to the computing world and see multiples of 8. But also just from specifically looking at recording, if we look at consoles, typically 8-channel buckets and multiples thereof. We look at recorders, 8 was a common number back then. And ADAT has evolved to be an 8-channel interface as well. So there's a number of repeating themes in terms of where we find 8. And so I suspect that that's a big historical reason that's flown into this. I guess there's not a technical reason why other numbers couldn't be supported. So obviously with the Scarlett range, we support 1, 2, 4, and 8 within the interface. Again, what it comes back to for making a practical decision in terms of what features within our product lineup or within the roadmap, it comes down to are there enough users out there who need that specific requirement, and then again going back to balancing that need with actually the economics of developing and building and being able to find the right sale price for such a product. I think the other thing that plays into it actually as well, which maybe is a bit of kind of retrospective justification rather than at the crux of it. But if you think about it, quite a lot of people want to have their bank of mic pre's that they're using for maybe general mic pre requirements, but then they might want to have 1 or 2 sort of key channels of a specific flavor of mic pre. And so I think the sort of channel counts that are on offer on the market, the form factors that are on offer, ultimately allow for that mix. So there's quite a lot of single and 2-channel mic pre's out on the market. There's quite a lot of 4 channels and 8 channels. So again, we're seeing that reflected not only on the interface, but also on the mic pre side of things. But with the either with the line inputs that are on our interfaces or with the digital inputs in SPDIF or in ADAT, then there's the option of adding additional mic pre's that way. And for example, if someone wanted to add another couple of Scarlett microphone preamps to one of their larger Scarlett interfaces, then in theory they could take one of the audio interfaces with digital I/O and actually use that as an additional input to that system. So, yeah, I think long story short, there's a lot of history there that's shaped the current picture, but I think it actually does suit people in reality.
And taking that further a little bit, obviously the larger Scarlett and Claret interfaces still come in 1U or 2U rack mounting cases. Now, obviously, back in the day, everything in a studio fitted in a 19-inch rack. But I imagine nowadays there's a lot of people buying these products who don't have any other rack mount gear at all, or indeed a rack to put them in. Have you explored the idea of putting these larger interfaces into a different kind of case?
Yeah, so I think it's a really interesting topic, and it comes down to, I think, a few different things. So in terms of what we've done in that area, we've evolved from earlier generations of the Scarlett 18i20 in particular, from being definitely a 100% rack mount based product, to now in the third generation of Scarlett 18i20, we have rack ears which are actually not screwed to the unit when you purchase it. They're inside the box ready to go. That includes also rubber feet on the bottom to ensure that if someone's using it desktop, that actually it's not just going to scratch their desk. So, we're already kind of considering that in the way that is presented. And indeed, there are a mixture of different use cases for that find it sometimes positioned underneath the computer monitor on the desk, sometimes off to the side, and again, sometimes in an equipment rack alongside other equipment. So the challenge really, again, is how do we make sure that there is the right functionality, or the right form factor rather, for these differing environments that it goes into. And I think we struck a nice position with the 18i20, but as part of the wider team, I'm always looking at how we could evolve that form factor and how we could potentially change that. And yeah, it's definitely a possibility moving into the future.
Well, the success of that product would suggest that you've got it right so far. And thank you so much, Will. I've got one final question for you then. Now that affordable interfaces like the Scarletts are so good, I mean, they offer performance and technical specifications that professional studios of 30 or 40 years ago couldn't even have dreamt of having. Are they kind of everything you need? Is there really any advantage to spending more and buying one of Focusrite's higher level interfaces? What improvement will you notice if you move up to, say, a Claret or a Red?
Yeah, again, really interesting question, and it's definitely warrants thinking about. So, yeah, what are the differences that we'll see? So, first of all, generally, as we go up the price ranges with our interfaces, there will be an improvement in converter quality. So, what do I mean by converter quality? Particularly on the dynamic range, so the noise performance. So we'd expect lower noise as we go up through the product ranges and spend more. Lower distortion figures as well, so providing ultimately a cleaner signal path through, and then a flatter frequency response. So that's one aspect, the converter quality itself. We then have the mic pre that goes into it, and again, it's a fairly similar set of parameters on a technical front that are changing there. And as well, we talked earlier about it a little bit, but the connection type that is being used on the interface. So as we go up from the Claret to the Red range, we introduce Thunderbolt. And Thunderbolt is going to bring about a couple of things in particular for users. So improved latency performance, so we're able to operate with lower round-trip latencies. And also we're going to be able to support a higher channel count compared to USB 2. so we can ultimately get more through the interface at a faster speed ultimately. I think the other thing to keep in mind is the change of the change of actual features that are on the interfaces as you go through the range. So again, when we look at the red range, we start to introduce Pro Tools HD connectivity over Digilink. We start to introduce Dante audio over IP connectivity, and ultimately we start to grow the channel count and give more options, more connectivity, and more interoperability with other devices.
Fantastic. Well, I think that satisfies me. Thanks, Will. That's been an absolutely fascinating conversation. Thanks so much for your time.
Thanks, Sam. It's been great speaking to you, and I look forward to next time.
You've been listening to the Sound on Sound People and Music Industry podcast with me, Sam Inglis. And be sure to check out the show notes page for this episode, where you'll find further information along with web links and details of all the other episodes. And just before you go, let me point you to the soundonsound.com/podcast website page, where you can explore what's playing on our other channels.